It was 6:30 a.m. at Fort Liberty, and the echo of boots striking the concrete floor filled Training Bay 12. I could smell sweat floor polish and the faint metallic sting of morning air. My heart was racing long before the drill began. Master Sergeant Patrick Monroe. My stepfather stood in front of us with that same confident smirk I had grown up fearing. He wasn't just the instructor today. He was my shadow from home now, wearing authority like armor. "We're demonstrating real combat response," he announced. His voice cut through the air like a blade. My stomach tightened because I already knew that tone. He wanted to make a point. "Specialist Ellis," he barked. "Front and center." My legs felt heavy, but I stepped forward. The other soldiers shifted uneasily. I could feel every pair of eyes on me, but I couldn't meet any of them. "We'll show them how to break a grab," Patrick said. He motioned for me to square up. I nodded and raised my stance. This was supposed to be controlled contact, the kind you walk away from with a bruise and pride. But Patrick's jaw was locked. I recognized the look from years ago when discipline meant pain disguised as lesson. He grabbed my shoulder hard enough that I lost my footing. Before I could reset, he pivoted and his boot connected squarely with my chest. The sound was sharp, like something snapping deep inside me. The air shot out of my lungs. For a second, I didn't even know if I was still standing. Then the floor rushed up and my vision blurred white. I couldn't breathe. All I could hear was the echo of my heartbeat pounding against my ribs. I tried to push up, but the pain stabbed through me, a clean line of fire. The room froze. Even the new recruits knew this wasn't part of the drill. A private moved forward instinctively, but Patrick threw out a hand. "Stand down," he ordered. "She's fine. Pain makes you stronger." The words rang in my ears because I had heard them before. He said them once when I was 12 and slipped on the kitchen floor. My mother stood behind him then, silent, just like the soldiers were now. I gasped for air, tried to rise, but my body refused. The medic on duty stepped closer, uncertain. Patrick's glare pinned him in place. "Handle it internally," he said. The medic hesitated, then crouched beside me and whispered, "Try to breathe slowly." His voice was kind but powerless. My chest screamed with each inhale. Patrick turned back to the formation. "This is what toughness looks like," he declared. "No weakness on my floor." The humiliation burned as much as the pain. I wanted to shout to tell them that something was wrong, but my voice cracked under the weight of his authority. A memory flashed him standing over me years ago, telling me crying was for civilians, not soldiers. My ribs ached, and I felt that same helpless heat crawling up my throat. 2 soldiers finally lifted me under the arms and set me on the bench near the wall. Patrick gave a nod that pretended to be concern. "You'll walk it off," he said quietly, but his eyes dared me to prove him wrong. I could taste iron in the back of my mouth. The medic returned with a clipboard, hands shaking slightly. "Specialist Ellis, you might need an external check," he murmured. Patrick's tone sharpened. "Internal review only. I'll file the report." His voice carried across the room and everyone obeyed. No one questioned him. The rest of the drill continued while I sat there dizzy and cold. My body felt foreign, every breath shorter than the last. I pressed a hand against my chest and flinched at the tenderness. The sound of commands echoed faintly as if from underwater. Each "yes, Sergeant" was a nail sealing the silence around me. When the formation finally dismissed, Patrick walked over. "You embarrassed me today," he said under his breath. "If you can't keep up, maybe you don't belong here." I wanted to say he had gone too far, but the words tangled somewhere between my lungs and the pain. "Understood, Sergeant," I managed. The phrase tasted bitter. He turned and walked away, leaving me with the medic. The young man knelt again, lowering his voice. "You need a proper X-ray. This doesn't look like a strain." I nodded, afraid to speak. "I'll call it in," he said, but Patrick reappeared at the door and shook his head once. The medic's face paled. "Handle it internally," Patrick repeated. When I was finally allowed to leave, the sun had climbed high enough to cast hard light over the training field. The glare made the world seem too sharp. I clutched my chest as I walked back toward the barracks. Every step sent another flash of pain across my ribs. My hand trembled as I reached for the door handle. Inside my quarters, I sat on the narrow bunk and stared at the ceiling. The hum of the air vent sounded like white noise in a storm. My mind replayed the moment over and over, the pivot, the kick, the crack. My body tensed each time as if bracing for it again. I told myself to breathe, but the air refused to fill my lungs completely. I glanced at my reflection in the small mirror above the sink. My face was pale, streaked with sweat and dust. I whispered, "You're fine," the same lie I had been told since childhood. But my chest told a different story. I pressed gently over the ribs and felt something shift beneath the skin. A deep ache rolled through me, steady and cruel. The sunbeam from the window caught the edge of my uniform, highlighting the patch that read Ellis. I wanted to believe that name stood for something separate from him, but right now it only reminded me that no matter how far I'd come, I was still under his command. The knock on my door made me jump. It was Sergeant First Class Alvarez, a steady man known for fairness. He looked at me and frowned. "You're heading to the clinic," he said. "You don't look fine." Before I could answer, Patrick's voice echoed from behind him down the hall. "Internal review, Sergeant. She's cleared." Alvarez hesitated, jaw tight. "Roger that," he said reluctantly. When the door closed, I sat back on the bunk and pressed a hand to my chest again. The pain was a steady drumbeat now, and I could hear my heartbeat against the cracked bone. Somewhere deep inside, a small voice whispered that this wasn't training anymore. It was something else. It always had been. And as I stared at the dull metal locker across from me, I felt the first flicker of defiance cut through the fear. When I was 10, I learned that silence could be a form of armor. It started the day the flag-covered casket came home to Fort Bragg. The air that morning was cold enough to sting my throat, and the bugle's final note hung in the air like a blade cutting through grief. My father had died overseas, and all I could think was that the folded flag in my mother's shaking hands looked too small to replace him. After the funeral, the world turned into whispers and orders. Mom stopped cooking, stopped talking. The sound of her voice became something I started to miss more than my father's laugh. Months later, she met Patrick Monroe, a sergeant who carried himself like the Army itself had built him. He had the kind of confidence that filled a room and left no air for anyone else. At first, I thought he was what Mom needed, someone strong, someone who wouldn't fall apart. But strength isn't the same as kindness. I learned that fast. When they married, he moved us into on-base housing, a square two-bedroom duplex painted the same lifeless tan as every other building on post. The first week, he said he wanted to teach me discipline. The word sounded noble until I realized it meant standing at attention in the living room while he criticized the way I folded towels. He timed my chores with a stopwatch. If I didn't finish on time, I ran laps around the block while he smoked on the porch, calling it training. Mom tried to laugh it off, said, "He just wants the best for you." But her voice trembled when she said it. Patrick had rules for everything: how to sit, how to talk, how to make eye contact. I once dropped a glass at dinner and he made me clean it up shard by shard with my bare hands because a soldier takes responsibility for the mess she makes. When I cut my palm, Mom reached for the first aid kit, but Patrick stopped her. "Let her handle it," he said. "Pain teaches discipline." That sentence became the background noise of my childhood. Still, I tried to win his approval. I joined JROTC in high school. I polished my boots until I could see my reflection. I memorized the rank structure before my classmates even knew what an NCO was. Every achievement I brought home, he'd nod once and say, "You're getting there." I didn't know where there was, but I kept walking toward it anyway. Somewhere in my teenage mind, I believed if I could be perfect, maybe he'd stop looking at me like I was a burden and start seeing me as a soldier worth training. By the time I was 16, my world revolved around inspection and avoidance. I could predict his mood from the way his boots landed on the tile. When the rhythm was sharp and even, I knew to stay silent. When it slowed, that meant he'd been drinking. Mom changed during those years. She started wearing her hair the way he liked it and stopped calling me sweetheart. He called her ma'am when he was angry Lisa when he wanted something and woman when he wanted to remind her who was in charge. Sometimes I'd catch her staring out the window for minutes at a time, and I wondered if she was looking for a way out or just trying to remember what sunlight felt like. One night, I woke to the sound of shouting. Mom had argued about money, something about him taking part of her paycheck for savings. His voice was calm, hers cracked. I remember pressing my ear to the door and hearing a thud, then silence. The next morning, she had a bruise on her arm the size of his palm, and breakfast tasted like guilt. When I asked, she said she slipped in the kitchen. The lie sounded practiced. Patrick's control didn't end at home. He started volunteering at my JROTC program. He gave speeches about discipline, about loyalty. Everyone respected him. "Your stepdad's a legend," one of the cadets said. I wanted to believe it, but the word legend made me sick. During inspections, he'd correct my posture in front of the others, gripping my shoulder a little too long, leaning close enough that I could feel his breath on my ear. "Keep your chin up," he'd whisper. "Soldiers don't break." I remember one particular afternoon during drill practice. It was raining, the kind of southern storm that soaks through everything in seconds. I slipped on the pavement and my rifle clattered against the ground. The instructor started to call a break, but Patrick stepped forward. "No breaks," he said. "She'll redo it until it's right." For an hour, I marched in the downpour until my uniform clung to me like a second skin. When I looked up at him, I thought I saw pride. Later, I realized it was satisfaction. When I turned 18, I enlisted. Mom cried at the bus station, but Patrick smiled. "Now we'll see if you're really tough," he said. On the ride to basic training, I stared out the window and promised myself I'd never need him again. But promises are easy when you don't know how deep control runs. During basic, I excelled. The structure, the predictability, they were familiar, almost comforting. Orders made sense. Instructors yelled, but they didn't mean it like he did. My drill sergeant once told me, "Ellis, you don't flinch at anything." I took it as a compliment. It wasn't. I'd been conditioned not to. I graduated near the top of my class. Patrick came to the ceremony in uniform, chest full of medals, and shook my hand like I was one of his subordinates. "You've made me proud," he said loud enough for others to hear. Then he leaned close and whispered, "Remember who trained you." That moment I realized pride from him was just another kind of control. Mom stayed quiet the entire drive home. When we reached the house, she hugged me in the doorway and whispered, "Don't let him get to you." Her voice cracked on the word, him. That night, she slipped a small envelope into my duffel bag. Inside was a photo of my real dad in his old army uniform smiling under the desert sun. On the back, she had written, "Service and control are not the same thing." I carried that photo with me through every deployment, every base, every moment I felt like disappearing. It was a reminder that somewhere beneath the uniform, I still had a self-worth defending. Years later, when the Army reassigned Patrick to Fort Liberty, and I found my name on the same duty roster, it felt like fate testing me. I was no longer the child who stood in the rain trying to earn his respect, but I also wasn't free. The first time I saw him in the hallway wearing his instructor's badge, he grinned like no time had passed. "Look at you," he said, still standing. I wanted to say, "In spite of you," but I swallowed it. That's the thing about obedience. It doesn't vanish when the orders stop. It lingers in your bones, teaching you when to stay quiet, when to breathe, when to survive. The night before the training accident, I dreamt of my father's funeral again. Only this time, it wasn't his casket on the truck. It was mine. The folded flag rested on Patrick's lap, and he smiled. I woke up gasping, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. The air in my barracks felt too thin. I sat there in the dark, clutching that old photo and whispering to myself, "He doesn't own your story anymore." I wanted to believe it, but deep down I knew belief alone had never been enough to stop him. Fort Liberty was supposed to be a new start, a clean slate wrapped in regulation gray and khaki. The first morning I arrived, the smell of jet fuel and wet asphalt hit me like a memory I didn't ask for. Soldiers moved in perfect rhythm boots, clapping against the pavement, their uniforms pressed sharp enough to cut air. On paper, I was doing well. Specialist Cameron Ellis Logistics and Readiness Division performance rated excellent. My supervisors liked that I never argued, never hesitated, never complained. They called it discipline. They didn't know it was survival. I worked long hours cataloging equipment shipments, running inventory checks, and training new arrivals on digital tracking systems. The warehouse floor always buzzed with noise. Forklifts humming metal crates, clanging radios crackling, but under all of it, there was a quiet rhythm in my head, counting seconds, waiting for the next command. My coworkers joked that I was the calmest soldier in chaos. I smiled and nodded because calm was safer than truth. 2 months into the new assignment, I heard his name on the roster. Master Sergeant Patrick Monroe. He had been transferred to Fort Liberty to oversee instructor development for advanced combat training. Same base, same streets, same commissary, same oxygen. For 3 years, I'd been free of his voice, and now it echoed again down the corridors like it never left. The first time I saw him was outside the gym. He was laughing with another instructor, but when he spotted me, the laughter died. His eyes measured me the way a trainer assesses a horse he once broke. "Specialist Ellis," he said, his tone all business. "I trust you're maintaining standards." I saluted, mask-fixed voice even. "Yes, Master Sergeant." "Good," he said, a faint smile cutting across his face. "Don't disappoint me this time." That night, I sat in my quarters, staring at my reflection. The patch on my sleeve read U.S. Army, but it still felt like his name stitched underneath. I replayed every conversation in my head, every correction, every smirk, every word, disguised as advice. Control doesn't vanish when you leave the house. It follows you into your uniform. Patrick's reputation on base was sterling. He was the kind of NCO who could quote regulations word for word the man commanders pointed to when they wanted things done right. But the soldiers under him whispered stories about impossible drills, about humiliation in front of peers. "He's old school," one sergeant told me, half in admiration, half in fear. Old school was just another word for cruel. It started small. He'd show up during my equipment inspections pretending it was coincidence. "Attention to detail," he'd say, running his hand along the crates. "You learned that from me." I kept my face neutral. He'd text me at odd hours. "Remember who you represent." Then, "You embarrass me once and I'll end your career." Each message was perfectly phrased, nothing explicit, nothing reportable, but the meaning was clear. My pulse spiked every time my phone buzzed. I started recording his voice during off-base calls. I saved every voicemail, every message, every slip of intimidation masked as mentorship. I uploaded them to a secure drive labeled Equipment Audit. It wasn't revenge then. It was insurance. Lisa came to visit once under the pretense of seeing her soldier. I hadn't seen my mother in over a year. She looked thinner, hair dyed a brighter shade of blonde as if to hide time. Over dinner at the base cafeteria, she avoided my eyes. "He's proud of you," she said softly. I forced a smile. "Is that what he told you?" She stirred her coffee. "He's under a lot of stress, Cameron. You know how he is." "I know exactly how he is," I said. Her eyes flicked up, warning me to lower my voice. "Please," she whispered, "don't start something you can't finish." That sentence felt heavier than the plate between us. Outside, the night air was thick with humidity. The flag above headquarters barely moved. Lisa hugged me too tightly, whispering, "He says you're being watched. Don't give them a reason to question you." I stepped back, forcing a nod. "Tell him I'll stay in line." The words tasted like surrender, but at that moment, I needed her to leave alive. In the following weeks, Patrick's presence grew everywhere. He led physical training for multiple units, oversaw evaluations, attended staff meetings, where my name appeared in reports he reviewed. Once during a logistics briefing, he leaned over my shoulder to correct a line on my spreadsheet. His breath brushed my ear. "I see you're learning obedience again." I froze, every muscle trained not to react. Around the table, officers discussed numbers and supply routes, oblivious. After that, I began to avoid shared spaces. I took lunch late, worked early, volunteered for night shifts in the warehouse where the hum of machines drowned my thoughts. The darkness felt safer than daylight. One evening, as I locked up Sergeant First Class Alvarez, the same man who'd tried to send me to the clinic after that morning drill stopped me. "You okay, Ellis?" he asked. His tone was quiet, not prying. "You've been here too long." I nodded. "Inventory's behind." He frowned but didn't push. "You ever need to talk, my door's open." I wanted to thank him, but the words stuck. Trust felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. By early spring, rumors started spreading about a demonstration Patrick planned for the advanced trainees. A live combat scenario meant to show the difference between technique and toughness. When I saw my name on the list of participants, my stomach dropped. I went straight to his office, requested a reassignment citing workload conflict. He smiled like he already knew. Denied, he said, "You'll do fine. It'll be good training for you." His voice lingered on the word training, twisting it until it sounded like a threat. That night, I sat at my desk and opened the folder labeled Equipment Audit. The sound of his recorded voice filled the room. "You embarrass me, once I'll end your career." My hand trembled slightly as I renamed the folder Evidence. I didn't know what I'd do with it yet, but naming it made it real. Outside, rain started tapping against the window. Lightning flickered, throwing my shadow across the wall. For a second, it looked like someone standing behind me. I turned quickly, heart hammering, but the room was empty. Just me, the rain, and the sound of a man who still believed he owned my silence. When I lay down that night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound in the barracks felt amplified: the rustle of sheets, the click of pipes, the far-off echo of boots in the hallway. I thought about how many times I'd mistaken fear for strength. The Army taught me discipline, but Patrick had taught me something else: how to survive by disappearing. As I stared at the ceiling, I realized that was no longer enough. Survival wasn't victory. It was just endurance dressed as obedience. I didn't want endurance anymore. I wanted freedom. The morning of the demonstration began like every other at Fort Liberty, but something in the air felt sharper. The sun hadn't climbed past the pine trees yet, and fog clung to the ground like smoke. The combat gym smelled of rubber mats, disinfectant, and anticipation. Rows of trainees stood at attention, sweat already beading on their foreheads from warm-up drills. I adjusted my gear heart, steady but heavy. Patrick stood in the center of the mat, larger than life in his instructor uniform, his stripes catching the pale light. "Today," he said, "we separate real soldiers from those who just wear the uniform." His gaze flicked toward me. "Specialist Ellis will assist." My breath caught. Every eye turned my way. "Yes, Master Sergeant," I replied, voice steady. I stepped forward, boots squeaking against the mat. The sound reminded me of childhood linoleum floors, that same sense of dread before the blow you couldn't stop. Patrick smiled tight, controlled. "We're demonstrating close-quarter defense using momentum and counterforce." He spoke like a teacher, calm, confident. The audience hung on every word. "The key is precision, no hesitation." His tone shifted ever so slightly enough for me to hear what they couldn't. "Ready, Cameron?" he asked. I nodded. He moved into stance. I mirrored him, eyes locked. The first contact was normal: a grip on my sleeve, a twist, a feigned takedown. I followed, resisting just enough to sell the demonstration. The soldiers watched, nodding, learning. Then it happened. He pivoted fast, faster than the drill required, and drove his knee into my ribs with full force. I heard the crack before I felt it. Then came the pain, white-hot, blinding. My breath vanished. The floor tilted. I stumbled back, gasping, clutching my side. For a second, the world went silent, except for the ringing in my ears. Someone shouted, "Sir, she's hurt," but Patrick's voice cut through like a whip. "No, she's fine. That's how training works. Real fights don't pause for weakness." He turned to the group. "Observe mental resilience under stress." I could barely stand. The room blurred around the edges. My body refused to obey the command to straighten. I tried to inhale, but every breath was fire. The medic on standby, a young specialist named Tyler, hesitated by the doorway. "Sir, I should check her," he said. Patrick glared at him. "Handle it internally." Tyler froze, torn between regulation and rank. I managed to whisper, "I can't breathe," but it came out like a broken whisper. Patrick stepped closer, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "Don't embarrass me again." The trainees looked confused, unsure whether to intervene or keep watching. One of them, a private named Lewis, took half a step forward before Patrick barked, "Stand down." The authority in his voice was enough to freeze them. The demonstration ended abruptly, dismissed as a success. As everyone filed out, Patrick crouched beside me, his smile a private weapon. "You'll be fine, soldier. Toughen up." I nodded weakly, every nerve screaming. He straightened and addressed the remaining soldiers. "Remember, pain is proof of progress." That line would echo in my head for days. Tyler helped me to the bench. "You need a doctor," he whispered. "Something's not right." I nodded but couldn't speak. Patrick loomed over us. "She'll go to the base clinic, no external referral." Tyler looked trapped, then saluted. "Yes, sir." He scribbled something on a clipboard, but I saw the hesitation in his eyes. He knew. Later that evening, the pain had spread like a wildfire across my chest. Every movement sent a shockwave through my body. I sat on my bunk, staring at the wall, trying to steady my breathing. Each inhale was shallow, fragile. I knew something was broken. Around 1900 hours, there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, Lisa stood there holding a casserole dish wrapped in foil. "Patrick said you got banged up during training," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Thought you might need dinner." I let her in too tired to argue. She set the dish down, glanced at the bruise forming under my collarbone, and her expression faltered. "Cameron, what happened?" she whispered. I stared at her. "You already know." She looked away. "He said it was an accident." I laughed, but it came out as a cough. "He kicked me, Mom, in front of everyone." Her hands trembled. "You'll ruin him if you talk about this." I blinked at her, stunned. "Ruin him," I repeated. "He could have killed me." "You don't understand," she said quickly. "He's under review for promotion. This could destroy everything." My voice cracked. "He already destroyed everything." Lisa's face hardened. "You've always been dramatic. Don't make it worse." She turned toward the door, then hesitated. "Just rest. Don't make any reports." She left before I could answer. The door clicked shut like a verdict. I sat there in the quiet pain, pulsing with every heartbeat. The lights buzzed overhead, the only sound in the room. My phone vibrated on the nightstand, a message from Patrick. "Remember what happens when soldiers lie." My throat tightened. I locked the phone and slid it into my boot. Then I reached for the small recording device I kept hidden inside my locker. My fingers trembled as I checked it. The red light blinked once before dying. Dead battery. My one line of defense gone. By midnight, I couldn't take a full breath. I knew I needed help. I made it halfway down the hallway before the world tilted again. My knees gave out and the floor met me hard. The sound drew a few soldiers from nearby rooms. "Ellis, you okay?" someone called. I tried to answer, but no sound came. The next thing I knew, I was looking up at a blur of faces and fluorescent lights. Tyler's voice came through, panicked. "Get a stretcher now." When I woke, I was in the base clinic. The sterile smell of antiseptic filled my nose. My ribs were bandaged tightly. Tyler hovered near the bed, tension written across his face. "You've got fractures," he said quietly. 3, maybe more. They need to send you for scans." Before I could respond, Patrick walked in his presence, freezing the room. "That won't be necessary," he said. "She's fine. We'll handle treatment here." Tyler started to protest, but Patrick cut him off. "Internal case. No paperwork." Lisa appeared behind him, her voice sharp. "She's fine, Sergeant. We'll take care of it." Tyler looked between us, helpless. I forced myself upright, pain shooting through my side. "I can't stay here," I whispered. "I need a real doctor." Patrick's expression hardened. "You're not going anywhere." Then he leaned close, voice low enough only I could hear. "You open your mouth about this, and I'll make sure you're discharged before sunrise." His words pressed heavier than the bandages. When he left, Tyler muttered something under his breath. I caught only the end of it. "This isn't right." He met my eyes briefly, then walked out. For the first time, I realized someone else had seen the truth. That night, I couldn't sleep. Each breath was a reminder of how easily bones break. I took slow inhales, counting in my head, the way I used to count during drills, anything to keep control. The sound of distant thunder rolled over the base. I thought about the word training and how he used it like a weapon, twisting its meaning until it covered everything from pain to silence. Before dawn, I packed a small bag. Inside, I placed my ID, my phone, and the dead recorder. I tucked it into my boot where he wouldn't look. I didn't know where I was going yet, only that I couldn't stay. The pain was constant, but something stronger had begun to rise beneath it. Something that felt like resolve. As I stepped outside, the wind cut through the humid air. The flag above headquarters hung limp in the gray light, waiting for sunrise. My ribs throbbed with each step, but I kept walking. Somewhere behind me in the echoing halls of Fort Liberty, Patrick Monroe still believed he controlled every move I made. He was wrong. Morning at Fort Liberty looked the same as every other day, but for me, the world tilted with every breath. I moved like a ghost through the corridors of the base clinic, my ribs wrapped in tight bandages, every inhale shallow and cautious. The fluorescent lights hummed above me too bright, too sterile. Tyler, the medic who had found me, met me at the doorway with eyes that carried questions he was too afraid to ask. "You shouldn't be walking around," he said quietly. "There's talk that the master sergeant filed the injury as a strain. No medical report was logged." His voice dropped lower. "That's not supposed to happen." I nodded, but words felt dangerous. Patrick had already filed a DA Form 285, accident report marking the incident as minor bruising sustained during standard demonstration. No external referral, no mention of fractures, no chain of command notification. A perfect lie written in regulation format. I had seen how paperwork could bury truth deeper than a grave. When I returned to my quarters, Lisa was waiting inside, sitting rigid on the edge of my bunk. She still had that calm, practiced look, the one that always preceded bad news. "You need to listen," she said. "Patrick's handling this. Don't go to anyone else." Her voice shook slightly, betraying the fear behind the command. "He said you're confused from the pain, that you exaggerated." I stared at her, unable to find the daughterly words she expected. "He fractured my ribs, Mom." "That's not confusion." Her gaze flicked toward the door, as if someone might be listening. "If you keep saying things like that, he'll lose everything. His pension, his reputation. You'll destroy us." I almost laughed at the word us. There had never been an us, not really. "He already destroyed me," I whispered. Lisa's face hardened. "You think you're the only one who suffered? You have no idea what happens when you cross him." I did know. I'd lived it. But hearing her defend him twisted something deep in my chest that hurt worse than the broken ribs. "He can't fix this," I said. "Not this time." She stood up, clutching her purse. "He already has. The paperwork's done. It's over." When she left, I sat for a long time, staring at the blank wall across from my bed. The air felt heavy, every second louder than the last. On my desk, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number appeared. "Keep quiet, soldier. You owe him." My skin went cold. Patrick always knew how to find new ways to remind me that silence was expected. I copied the message, forwarded it to my private email, and deleted the thread. Small acts of rebellion that felt like survival. That night, I could barely sleep. The pain pulsed with every heartbeat, and my thoughts circled the same question. How do you expose someone who controls the system that's supposed to protect you? The answer came from instinct, not logic. I reached under my bed and pulled out my uniform jacket. In the inner pocket, I kept a small USB drive, the one where I'd saved the recordings of his threats. I added screenshots of his messages and the scan of his falsified report Tyler had shown me briefly before being ordered to destroy it. The drive was small silver, easily missed. I sealed it inside a waterproof pouch and tucked it into my boot. The same boot I wore the day he called it training. 2 days later, my chest tightened again during a routine inspection. I tried to push through the pain, but my body rebelled. I collapsed near the warehouse entrance, gasping for breath. The world blurred in waves of white and gray. When I opened my eyes, I was on a stretcher, the sound of radio chatter echoing around me. Tyler's face hovered above mine. "You're going to WUMAC," he said firmly. "No more internal anything." He didn't wait for permission. He signed the transfer order himself. When I came to, again, the walls around me were cleaner, the lights softer. A woman in uniform stood by my bed, clipboard in hand. "I'm Lieutenant Maya Clark," she said. "Medical Corps. You're safe here." Her tone carried quiet authority that didn't demand obedience. It invited trust. She examined my ribs with careful hands, noting the bruising patterns. "This isn't from a fall," she said. "This is deliberate." My throat tightened. "He said it was training," I murmured. Maya's eyes met mine, calm but sharp. "Then we'll call it evidence." Before she could continue, the door burst open. Patrick filled the frame, his presence swallowing the room. "I'm her stepfather," he announced. "I'll handle this." Maya didn't flinch. "Close that door, Sergeant. She's under medical jurisdiction now." His jaw clenched. "You have no idea who you're talking to." "Actually," she said, turning back to her clipboard, "I do." She wrote something and handed it to a nurse. "DA Form 4106, suspected assault, effective immediately." The nurse disappeared down the hall. Patrick stepped closer to my bed, his voice dropping. "You think a piece of paper changes anything?" "You're done, Cameron." I forced myself to meet his eyes. "Maybe, but not before they hear what you did." For a moment, I saw something crack in his expression. Rage, disbelief, maybe fear. Then he turned and walked out, the sound of his boots fading into the sterile hum of the hospital corridor. Maya stayed beside me, her tone softening once the door closed. "We'll contact the Criminal Investigation Division. They'll take it from here." My chest ached as I tried to sit up. "He'll come after me," I said. "He always does." Maya shook her head. "Not this time. You're not alone anymore." The words felt unreal, almost foreign. No one had ever said that to me before. Outside, I could hear raised voices, Lisa arguing with security, Patrick's name echoing down the hall. A nurse whispered something to Maya, who sighed and turned to me. "They're demanding to see you. I told them no." "You need rest." Through the small window in the door, I saw Lisa clinging to Patrick's arm, pleading with the guards. Patrick's face was red, his fists tight. He looked less like an instructor and more like a cornered animal. Maya placed a hand on my shoulder, gently, careful not to touch the bandages. "You did the hard part already," she said. "You survived him. The rest is procedure." I wanted to believe her, but I'd learned long ago that paperwork didn't guarantee safety. That night, I lay awake listening to the low murmur of hospital machines. For the first time in years, the air around me felt still untouched by his control. The pain in my ribs was constant, but underneath it was something else, a quiet relief. The lie was unraveling one thread at a time, and for once, he couldn't stop it. I closed my eyes and whispered a silent promise to myself I would not let him write the ending to my story. The next morning, the soft buzz of fluorescent lights and the steady rhythm of my heart monitor filled the quiet of the hospital room. I was still at Womack Army Medical Center, wrapped in layers of white sheets and quiet disbelief. The door opened with a calm click, and Lieutenant Maya Clark stepped in, holding a tablet and a cup of coffee. Her uniform was crisp, her expression composed, but her eyes carried warmth I hadn't seen from anyone in uniform for a long time. "Good morning, Specialist Ellis," she said, her tone professional but kind. "How's the pain level?" I hesitated. "Manageable?" I lied. She raised an eyebrow. "Your vitals say otherwise." "Let's skip the tough soldier act." I almost smiled. She pulled up a chair and sat beside my bed, scrolling through the scan results. 3 fractures on the left side, 1 hairline on the right. "These aren't from a fall or training strain. The compression pattern shows direct impact, someone kicked you." Hearing it said out loud made my throat close. "That's not an assumption," she continued. "That's anatomy." I stared at the ceiling, trying to hold myself together. "He said it was part of the drill," I whispered. Maya's jaw tightened. "Then we'll prove otherwise." Her tone carried the confidence of someone used to standing up to power. She turned her tablet toward me, showing photos of my injuries, purplish bruises forming over my ribs, the faint outline of a boot tread visible beneath the swelling. "I need your statement," she said softly. "You don't have to talk about everything now, but I can't protect you unless you give me something on record." I hesitated, my instinct screaming that speaking up meant danger. Patrick always said silence was survival. But Maya's calm didn't feel like an order. It felt like a promise. I took a shaky breath. He called it discipline. Said I made him look weak in front of his trainees. She nodded slowly, typing as I spoke. "Has there been prior disciplinary behavior?" I almost laughed at her careful choice of words. "Since I was 10, I said quietly. At home, it was discipline. In uniform, it became training." She paused, typing, looking at me for a long moment. "You've been living under his command your whole life." "Feels like it," I said. Maya sighed, closing the tablet. I'm filing a mandatory report under AR 620. That means the Criminal Investigation Division gets notified immediately. He can't override that. The sound of the hospital door opening cut through the room before I could respond. Patrick stood there, his uniform immaculate, his voice low and steady. "Lieutenant Clark," he said, pretending courtesy. "You're making a mistake." Maya didn't look up from her notes. "Step outside, Sergeant. This is a restricted consultation." "That's my stepdaughter," he said, his voice sharp. "She's confused. I'll take responsibility." Maya finally looked up. "You've taken enough responsibility." Security 2 MPs appeared at the door like they'd been waiting for her signal. Patrick's mask cracked just enough for me to see the fury beneath it. "You'll regret this," he hissed. Maya's expression didn't change. "Not as much as you will." He was escorted out, his threats fading down the hall. Maya closed the door and turned back to me. "He's suspended pending investigation. You'll stay here under observation until CID interviews you." My heart pounded. "What if he comes back?" She shook her head. "He won't get past the checkpoint. For the first time in years, I felt like someone else was in control, and it wasn't him." Over the next few days, Maya checked on me regularly. She'd stop by between shifts sometimes just to talk about ordinary things, the best coffee on post, the sound the base chapel bell made at noon, her first deployment overseas. One afternoon she said, "You remind me of someone I knew years ago, a soldier who thought she was unbreakable until someone tried to prove otherwise. She's fine now, stronger but different." I understood what she meant. Strength had a price. On the third day, she brought a detective from CID, Agent Daniel Ruiz. His demeanor was patient-measured. "We'll need to record your statement," he said. Maya stood beside me as I spoke. I told them about the drill, the messages, the years of silence. Ruiz asked careful questions, his tone neutral but firm. When I mentioned the falsified injury report, Maya nodded. "We already secured the base clinic logs. His signature's there." Ruiz leaned forward. "Do you have any evidence of direct threats?" My hand shook slightly as I reached for my phone. In my email, I said, "I saved screenshots, and there's a USB drive in my boot recordings of his calls." Ruiz looked at Maya, impressed. "She's thorough." Maya smiled faintly. "She's a survivor." After the interview, Maya stayed behind. "You did good," she said softly. "That's the hardest part. I wanted to believe her, but fear still coiled tight in my chest." "He'll find another way," I murmured. "He always does." Maya leaned closer. "Not this time. There's a protective order in effect, and if he so much as tries to contact you, he'll be arrested." Her confidence was steady, but she didn't offer false comfort. "You've been silenced for too long. Let the truth make the noise now." That evening, as the sun set beyond the hospital window, I saw her sitting outside in the corridor, still in uniform, reviewing files. Her presence was a constant reminder that someone believed me. For the first time, belief felt like armor instead of weakness. Later that night, when the ward lights dimmed, I whispered into the quiet, "Thank you, Maya." I wasn't sure if she heard me, but I saw her shadow pause outside the frosted glass before moving on. I realized then that allies don't always appear in battles. They appear in aftermaths when the smoke is still clearing and you're too weak to stand on your own. The investigation began quietly, as if the Army wanted to pretend it was just another administrative review. But beneath the calm surface, I could feel the machinery of justice starting to turn. 2 days after Patrick was escorted off the ward, I was moved from the hospital's main floor to a smaller recovery room guarded by an MP outside the door. Lieutenant Maya Clark visited every morning, bringing coffee and updates that felt both comforting and terrifying. "CID has opened a formal case," she said one morning, sliding a file across the table. "Agent Daniel Ruiz will handle it. He's solid." I nodded, trying to steady my breath. The pain in my ribs had dulled into a constant ache, but the weight pressing on my chest was heavier than any bandage. "Will it go to court?" I asked. "If the evidence holds," she said simply. "And from what I've seen, it will." That afternoon, Agent Ruiz arrived. He was a calm man in his 40s, his uniform crisp but worn at the edges, like someone who'd seen too much but never let it harden him. He introduced himself politely, then placed a small recorder on the table. This interview is part of the official CID case file, he said. You can stop at any time. Do you understand? I nodded. Yes, sir. His tone softened. No, sir. Just Daniel. For the first time in a long while, authority didn't sound like a threat. He started with simple questions, date rank assignment, then moved carefully toward the events of the incident. Tell me about the demonstration, he said. I described the setup, the stance, the impact. When I reached the part where Patrick kicked me, my throat tightened. Daniel didn't interrupt, just listened, occasionally writing notes. When I finished, he asked, Has anything like this happened before? I hesitated. Maya, sitting quietly nearby, gave a slight nod. Yes, I said. Not this bad, but yes. I told them about the discipline drills at home, about the long hours standing at attention, the threats, the control. The words came slower the longer I spoke, but once they started, they wouldn't stop. Daniel leaned forward slightly. Did anyone else witness these incidents? My mother, I said. But she'll defend him. She always does. He nodded, his expression unreadable. We'll speak with her anyway. He asked about evidence. I handed him the USB drive I'd hidden in my boot. Voice recordings, I said. Threats, mostly. He used to call after hours. Daniel raised an eyebrow. You've kept these for how long? A year, I admitted. I didn't know why, just that someday I might need them. He smiled faintly. You have good instincts, specialist. Over the next few days, CID began collecting witness statements. Tyler the medic was interviewed. He confirmed Patrick's interference and the falsified paperwork. Sergeant First Class Alvarez provided a statement about being overruled when he tried to send me for medical evaluation. Slowly, the cracks in Patrick's story widened. Maya showed me parts of the report as it evolved. Each statement builds the case, she explained. It's like a puzzle, and every piece he thought he could hide is starting to fit. But with every step forward came the backlash. Rumors started spreading through the base. Soldiers whispered that I'd set up my stepfather, that I'd exaggerated to get him in trouble. Some avoided me in the halls, unsure what to believe. Others stared openly, their curiosity sharper than any question. One morning, I found a note slipped under my door. Traitors don't belong in uniform. I showed it to Maya, who sighed. He still has friends here, she said, but don't let them make you doubt yourself. Their loyalty isn't to the truth, it's to rank. A week later, Daniel called me into CID headquarters in Fayetteville. The room was small, windowless, with walls covered in military posters about integrity and duty. He gestured to a chair across from him. We've gathered enough to proceed with Article 32, he said. My stomach dropped. A court-martial preliminary hearing first, he explained. It determines if there's sufficient evidence for trial. But yes, it's heading that way. I stared at the table, tracing the grain of the wood with my fingertips. Will I have to testify? You'll have to speak, he said gently. But you won't be alone. Captain Rachel Kim from JAG will represent you. She's one of the best. That night, I couldn't sleep. The idea of facing Patrick in a courtroom made my pulse race. Every instinct screamed to run, to disappear. But then I remembered Maya's words. Let the truth make the noise. I had spent a lifetime being silent. Maybe it was time to let the truth speak for me. When the Article 32 hearing began, I wasn't in the same room as Patrick, only connected via secure video. I sat beside Captain Kim, a sharp, composed woman who spoke with precision. Daniel presented the evidence, the medical reports, the witness statements, the recordings. Patrick's voice filled the speakers. You embarrass me once, I'll end your career. Even though it was just a recording, my body reacted as if you were standing behind me again. My hands trembled under the table. Captain Kim placed a steadying hand on my arm. You're doing fine, she whispered. Patrick's attorney tried to paint the injury as an accident, arguing that demonstration drills carry inherent risks. But Daniel countered with Maya's medical analysis. Compression fractures indicate targeted force. The impact angle is consistent with an intentional strike, not misstep. The hearing officer listened silently, taking notes. When it was over, Patrick's side offered no new evidence. The recommendation was clear: proceed to general court-martial. After the session, I stepped outside into the Fayetteville air. The sky was wide and open, the kind that made you feel small, but somehow free. Maya met me near the parking lot, handing me a bottle of water. You did it, she said. He's not untouchable anymore. I exhaled slowly, tension leaving my body in pieces. It's not over, I said. No, she agreed, but now it's official. Back at the hospital, Lisa finally visited. She looked exhausted, her hands shaking. They've been questioning me, she said, voice low. They said if I lie, I could face charges. I met her gaze. Then tell the truth. Her lips pressed together. You don't understand. He'll ruin me. He already has, I said quietly. For a long moment she said nothing. Then tears filled her eyes. I thought marrying him would save us, she whispered. Instead, I gave him both our lives. I didn't know how to respond. I wanted to forgive her, but the wound was too fresh. When she left, I sat alone, staring at the reflection of the sunset on the window. As the days passed, CID continued gathering evidence. Patrick's financial records revealed patterns of control, joint accounts in Lisa's name, but managed solely by him transfer logs showing he paid off subordinates for favors. Each discovery chipped away at the image he had built. Maya kept me updated daily. He's losing his grip, she said one evening, and he knows it. But fear still lingered. I caught myself flinching at footsteps, expecting his voice around every corner. Trauma doesn't vanish when the abuser leaves. It lingers in the silence they used to fill. One night, I dreamed of that training bay again. I woke, drenched in sweat, gasping for air, half expecting to hear his boots approaching. Instead, I heard the distant hum of the hospital ventilation and realized I was safe. 2 weeks later, Daniel visited one last time. We're wrapping the investigation, he said. Court-martial's set for early summer. I nodded, unable to speak. He stood pausing at the door. You know he said most people never stand up to someone like him. They freeze. You didn't. I was terrified. I admitted. He smiled faintly. Courage isn't the absence of fear, specialist. It's walking through it anyway. When he left, Maya appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, expression proud. You did it, she said. You gave the system a spine. I laughed softly, the sound strange after weeks of tension. No, I said, you did. You believed me. Maya shook her head. I just lit the match. You're the one who burned down the lie. As the sun dipped below the horizon outside the hospital window, I realized the investigation had done more than expose him. It had started to rebuild me. The first day I walked into the JAG office at Fort Liberty, the air felt colder than outside. Everything was too clean, too quiet, too full of rules. Captain Rachel Kim stood waiting by the window, her posture straight and calm, like someone who'd learned how to hold both empathy and authority at once. Specialist Ellis, she said, shaking my hand firmly. I've read your file. It's strong, but the road ahead won't be easy. I nodded, pretending I wasn't terrified. She motioned for me to sit and slid a folder across the table. Inside were photos, transcripts, and legal jargon I could barely process. This, she said, tapping the papers, is how we fight back with facts, consistency, and patience. She explained the structure: preliminary hearings, discovery phase testimonies. Every word felt heavier than the last. He'll have his own counsel, she continued, probably civilian. They'll try to make you doubt your memory, your motives, even your injury. Your job is to tell the truth. Mine is to make sure it's heard. Over the next few weeks, preparation became my new mission. I spent hours in that sterile office with Rachel and Maya going over every possible question the defense could ask. Why didn't you report earlier? Were you under stress? Could this have been an accident? Each time, Rachel stopped me when my voice wavered. Don't defend yourself, she'd say. Just describe what happened. The truth doesn't need apology. She had a way of making her words feel like armor. Maya sat nearby most days, offering quiet encouragement. Between breaks, she'd bring coffee and talk about anything but the case, how the magnolias were starting to bloom, how the hospital had begun new training protocols inspired by mine. Little things that reminded me life still existed outside courtrooms and trauma. Patrick, I learned, had hired a civilian attorney from Charlotte named Gregory Henson, a man known for defending high-ranking officers. He'll be ruthless, Rachel warned, but predictable. His kind always underestimates women who refuse to stay silent. There was a quiet fierceness in her voice when she said it, like she'd fought this battle before. Lisa received her subpoena next. When I heard my stomach clenched, Rachel assured me it was necessary. Her testimony matters. Even if she doesn't support you fully, inconsistencies in her statements will work in our favor. I wanted to believe that, but I knew how skilled my mother was at surviving by denial. One afternoon, while reviewing evidence, Rachel played one of Patrick's recordings aloud. His voice filled the room. "You embarrass me once, I'll end your career." Hearing it again felt like standing on that training mat all over. My ribs tightened, my breath quickened. Rachel reached over, lowering the volume. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded, though my throat felt like sandpaper. Maya placed a hand on my shoulder. "Every time you listen, it loses power," she said softly. "It stops being a threat and becomes proof." I clung to that thought. Outside the office, life on base carried on as if nothing had happened. Soldiers drilled, officers barked commands. The flag rose and fell with mechanical precision. But whispers followed me everywhere. Some called me brave. Others called me reckless. I learned to keep my eyes forward and my silence selective. One evening, Alvarez caught up with me near the mess hall. "I heard about the trial," he said. "You're doing the right thing." His voice was low, careful. "A lot of people won't say it out loud, but they're proud of you." It was the first time anyone in uniform had told me that. The day before the trial, Rachel gathered the team in a small conference room. "Tomorrow you testify," she said. "No scripts, no rehearsed emotion. Just truth. If you falter, I'll redirect. If you're attacked, breathe and answer only what's asked. You control the rhythm." Her confidence was steady enough to calm the tremor in my chest. Maya stood by the door, arms crossed, silent but solid. "You're not just fighting for yourself," Rachel added. "You're fighting for every soldier who's been told to stay quiet." I didn't respond, but the words settled deep. That night, I barely slept. I sat by the window of my apartment in Fayetteville, the city lights flickering like stars that forgot how to shine. My ribs still ached when I breathed too deeply, a reminder carved into bone. I thought about my father's old photograph, the one my mother had given me years ago. I placed it on the desk beside my trial uniform and whispered, "Tomorrow I speak." Morning came early. Maya arrived to drive me to the courthouse. The silence between us wasn't awkward, it was protective. As we neared the base, I saw reporters outside the gates, their cameras waiting. "Media blackout was supposed to hold," I murmured. Maya sighed. "Leaks happen. People love stories about heroes and villains. Just remember, you're neither. You're the truth." Inside the courthouse, everything smelled like paper and tension. Rachel led me to a small waiting room. "He's here," she said quietly. My pulse raced. Through the glass window, I saw Patrick sitting at the defense table, his uniform pressed, his medals gleaming, his face unreadable. For a moment, I saw the same man who once taught me to tie my boots, then the one who'd taught me to fear my own reflection. My stomach turned. Rachel closed the blinds. "Focus on me," she said firmly. "He doesn't own your gaze anymore." We went over last-minute notes, then sat in silence. When the bailiff finally called my name, my knees felt unsteady, but my resolve held. As I walked toward the courtroom door, Maya's voice followed softly. "Remember, truth outranks power." That phrase carried me into the next room, where rows of uniforms waited judgment disguised as neutrality. I took the stand, raised my hand, and swore the oath. For the first time, my voice didn't tremble. The courtroom at Fort Liberty was colder than I remembered. Maybe it was just me, the nerves, the way every fluorescent light seemed to hum louder than usual. Rows of soldiers filled the gallery, their faces still unreadable. When I took my seat beside Captain Rachel Kim, my hands were shaking beneath the table. She noticed, but said nothing, just gave a small nod as if to say, we were where we needed to be. Across the aisle, Patrick sat rigid in his uniform. Every medal polished to perfection, his jaw locked in the same expression he used to wear when he lectured me about obedience. His attorney, Gregory Henson, whispered something, and Patrick's lips curved into the faintest smirk. It wasn't arrogance, it was habit, the kind of confidence built from years of getting away with everything. The judge, Colonel Richard Dawes, entered, and the courtroom rose. "You may be seated," he said. His voice was deep and even, commanding silence instantly. The trial began. The prosecution opened with the facts. Rachel stood tall, voice steady, recounting the incident with surgical precision. Specialist Cameron Ellis was injured during what was described as a training demonstration. However, evidence will show that the injury was the result of deliberate excessive force. She displayed photos from my medical report on the screen, my x-rays, the fractures along my ribs, like cracks in glass. These are not the result of a fall, she said. They are the result of targeted impact. Then she pressed play on the recording from my smartwatch. The room filled with Patrick's voice. "Don't you dare report this. You hear me? You'll regret it." The sound was like acid in the air. I heard gasps ripple through the room, a low murmur rising before the judge silenced it. When it was the defense's turn, Henson stood smoothly buttoning his jacket. "Training by nature involves risk," he began. "My client, Master Sergeant Monroe, has trained hundreds of soldiers without incident. He regrets what happened to his stepdaughter, but maintains that it was an unfortunate accident during a legitimate demonstration." His tone was sympathetic, even paternal, and I could see some of the soldiers in the gallery nodding slightly, understanding the language of hierarchy. He gestured toward Patrick. "He's served this nation with honor for 25 years. He's not on trial for that service, but let's not forget it. It was a calculated move to shield the abuse behind the uniform." Rachel countered by calling Lieutenant Maya Clark to the stand. Maya's presence alone changed the atmosphere. She wore her uniform like armor, her gaze unwavering as she took the oath. "Lieutenant Clark," Rachel began, "you were the attending physician at Womack Army Medical Center when Specialist Ellis was admitted. What did you observe?" Maya's tone was clinical but filled with quiet conviction. Fractures to the left ribcage consistent with direct blunt force. The pattern of trauma could not have resulted from a fall or improper technique. The impact was intentional. She pointed to the medical imaging on the screen. "Notice the compression here. It shows sustained contact. Not a slip, not a stumble." When Henson cross-examined, he tried to rattle her. "Lieutenant, are you suggesting that an experienced instructor like Master Sergeant Monroe attacked his stepdaughter in front of witnesses?" Maya didn't flinch. "I'm not suggesting it," she said. "The evidence says it." Her words landed like a hammer. Then came my turn. Rachel's hand on my shoulder steadied me as I approached the stand. The oath felt heavier than I expected. I began with the events of that morning, the drill, the kick, the sound of the crack. I told them about the nights after the pressure to stay silent, the cover-up, the threats. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. My voice carried years of swallowed words finally released. When I said, "He called it training," the silence in the room was so deep I could hear the hum of the ceiling lights. Then came the defense's turn. Henson stood adjusting his tie. "Specialist Ellis," he said smoothly, "you've described your stepfather as controlling, even abusive. But tell me, did you ever file a complaint before this incident?" "No," I said. "Why not?" "Because he was my superior," I said, "and my family." He smiled thinly. "So it's possible that this is a family dispute exaggerated into a professional accusation." I met his eyes. "No, sir. It's possible that you've never been afraid of someone who outranks you." A few heads turned. Even the judge looked up from his notes. Henson paused, cleared his throat, and moved on. When I stepped down, my legs felt weak, but Rachel's nod anchored me. The next witness was Lisa. I hadn't seen her since the investigation began. She looked smaller somehow, her face pale, her hands twisting a tissue. "Mrs. Monroe," Rachel began, gently, "do you recall what your husband told you to say about the incident?" Lisa hesitated. "He said it was an accident," she whispered. And you believed that Lisa's eyes filled with tears. "I wanted to, but he told me if I said otherwise, he'd ruin us." Rachel's tone softened. "So you lied to protect him?" Lisa nodded, crying openly now. I thought it would end there, but it didn't. The courtroom was utterly silent. Even Patrick's attorney looked uneasy. Rachel approached the bench with her final statement. "This is not about family drama," she said. "It's about power, how it's used, and how it's abused. The Army teaches us that leadership demands integrity. When someone uses their rank to harm instead of protect, it's not training. It's betrayal." The defense tried one last desperate move, introducing a short video from the training session. It showed the seconds before the impact Patrick demonstrating for me stepping forward. Then the clip cut out. "See," Henson said. "No clear intent." Rachel stood immediately. "Play the rest." The technician hesitated. "We don't have it," he said. "It was deleted." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Deleted evidence in a military investigation." Rachel seized the moment. "Your Honor, deletion implies guilt." That was the turning point. After closing arguments, the panel deliberated for 3 hours. 3 hours that felt like 3 lifetimes. I sat in the waiting room staring at the pattern of the floor tiles, counting my breaths. Maya sat beside me, silent, calm. "Whatever happens," she said finally, "you already did what most never could." I nodded, unable to speak. When the panel returned, everyone rose. The judge's voice carried through the room. "On the charge of assault consummated by battery in violation of Article 128 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, this court finds the accused guilty." The word echoed like thunder. Lisa sobbed quietly. Patrick didn't move, didn't even blink. But something in his expression broke, a crack too small for anyone else to see, but large enough for me to feel. The judge continued. "Sentence: dishonorable discharge, forfeiture of all pay and allowances, confinement for 8 years at the United States Disciplinary Barracks, Fort Leavenworth." The air shifted. The authority that had always wrapped around Patrick like armor vanished in an instant. He stood as the MPs approached, hands steady, posture rigid. For a moment, his eyes met mine, not pleading, not angry, just empty. Then they led him away. When the gavel struck the room, exhaled. Rachel squeezed my hand. "It's over," she whispered. But it didn't feel over. It felt like the beginning of something I hadn't dared to imagine freedom. Maya joined us in the hallway, her smile small but fierce. "You just changed more than one life, specialist." I looked back through the glass window as Patrick disappeared down the corridor. "No," I said softly. "I just told the truth." That night, I sat in my apartment, ribs aching, heart lighter than it had been in years. The scars would stay. The memories would never fade completely, but for the first time, they didn't define me. Justice had spoken, and it had used my voice. The first morning after the verdict, I woke to sunlight instead of alarms. For a moment, I forgot where I was. The walls weren't hospital white or army green. They were soft beige, painted by Aunt Carol, who'd insisted I stay in her Fayetteville apartment until I could find my footing again. The silence felt foreign. No boot stomping, no barked orders, no clipped voices reminding me of rank and failure. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the slow, steady rhythm of my breathing. My ribs still ached when I moved too quickly, but the pain no longer ruled me. It was a remnant, not a sentence. Recovery became a quiet routine. Physical therapy 3 times a week, counseling every Thursday, long walks by the Cape Fear River when the weather allowed. The doctors said the bones were healing well, but what they didn't say, what they couldn't, was how long it would take for my mind to stop replaying the sound of that kick, the silence that followed the disbelief in my father's eyes. Therapy helped, but healing wasn't linear. Some days progress felt like climbing a hill only to slide back down. Others, it felt like standing at the top, able to breathe again. Lieutenant Maya Clark visited, often still in uniform, her presence grounding. The hospital's implementing new reporting procedures, she told me one afternoon, sipping coffee on the balcony. "Your case opened a lot of eyes." She smiled faintly. "They're even training staff to recognize coercion in military families." The thought filled me with quiet satisfaction. "Good," I said. "If even one soldier gets help faster than I did, it's worth it." Maya studied me for a moment. "You still wear that strength like armor," she said. "You don't have to anymore." I looked at the scars running across my ribs, faint but permanent. "Maybe not armor," I said. "Maybe just memory." Letters began to arrive, some from strangers, others from soldiers I'd never met. One, written in careful block letters, said, "Because you spoke up, I finally did too." Another came from a private I vaguely remembered from training. "You made it safe for the rest of us to be honest." I kept every one of them in a small box on my desk, proof that pain when named could turn into purpose. Lisa wrote too. The first letter was apologetic but distant, full of phrases like, "I didn't know and I wish I'd done more." I didn't reply. The second letter came weeks later, shorter and rawer. I saw the footage. I saw what he did. I was wrong. This time I read it twice before folding it neatly and placing it in the same box as the others. Not forgiveness, not closure, just acknowledgement. Sometimes that was enough. My father's picture still sat on my nightstand. He'd served too long before any of this, long before I understood what honor was supposed to mean. Some nights I talked to him quietly like when I was a kid. I didn't just survive this, I told him once. I made it count. It felt like speaking to the best part of myself, the part that refused to disappear. Captain Rachel Kim called near the end of summer. "How's the civilian world treating you?" she asked. "Strange," I said honestly. "Quieter, but good." She chuckled softly. "That's the right kind of strange." Before hanging up, she added, "You know, the JAG office is recruiting civilian consultants for training seminars on abuse reporting. You'd be perfect for it." The idea startled me, but something about it made sense. Maybe helping others find their voice was how I'd keep mine strong. One afternoon, I walked through downtown Fayetteville past coffee shops and antique stores until I reached a small community center. A flyer taped to the door read, "Support Group Military Survivors of Abuse, Thursdays at 6 p.m. I hesitated, then stepped inside. The room smelled faintly of disinfectant and cinnamon candles. A handful of people sat in a circle, some in civilian clothes, others still in uniform. The facilitator smiled. "You're welcome to join," she said gently. I sat down, heart pounding, and for a long time just listened. One woman spoke about her husband, a retired sergeant who controlled every dollar she spent. Another man described the fear of reporting a superior who'd threatened his career. When my turn came, I took a deep breath. "I'm Specialist Cameron Ellis," I said. I used to believe silence kept me safe. It didn't. The room was still. Then someone nodded, and another. In that moment, I realized that healing wasn't about forgetting, it was about connecting. As weeks passed, I started volunteering at the center, helping new attendees navigate resources. The first time I guided someone through the process of filing a report, I felt the same trembling in my chest I'd felt when I'd spoken to CID. Only this time it wasn't fear, it was recognition. "You'll be okay," I told them. "It won't be easy, but it'll be yours. Your truth, your voice." One evening while leaving the center, I saw a young private waiting outside. He hesitated before speaking. "Ma'am," he said softly, "I was at Fort Liberty when it happened. I saw you testify. You were brave." I smiled, shaking my head. "No," I said. "I was just done being quiet." He grinned, awkwardly saluted, and walked away. For the first time, the word soldier didn't feel like something that belonged to someone else. It felt like mine again. The Army eventually issued a formal statement acknowledging procedural failures in my case. It wasn't dramatic, just a few paragraphs buried in a public bulletin, but it mattered. They had named the problem, and once something was named, it could be changed. One crisp autumn morning, I drove back to Fort Liberty. The parade ground was empty, the flag waving lazily against the blue sky. I stood there for a long time, breathing in the familiar scent of cut grass and damp earth. The base hadn't changed, but I had. I no longer flinched at the echo of boots or the sharp call of orders. Those sounds didn't belong to him anymore. They belonged to every soldier who'd ever learned that strength wasn't obedience, it was endurance. That night, I wrote in my journal, "Healing is the quiet after justice." It's not loud or glorious. It's steady, like the sound of your own heartbeat when you realize you survived. Then I closed the book, turned off the light, and let the silence finally feel like peace. The first time my name appeared in the news, it didn't feel real. A local Fayetteville outlet ran the headline, "Soldiers' Courage Sparks Change at Fort Liberty," underneath a photo of me shaking hands with Lieutenant Maya Clark during a community event. I hadn't expected it. I didn't want fame. I wanted peace. But as the story spread, something larger started unfolding, a public reckoning with what everyone on base had tried to ignore. Suddenly, people were talking about abuse of authority, the chain of command, the silence that protected men like Patrick for too long. For the first time, my story wasn't whispered. It was reported. Maya was the one who convinced me to speak publicly. "You don't have to," she said gently when the Department of Defense's Public Affairs Office reached out. "But if you do, it could help others see that truth can survive the system." I hesitated. My instinct was to stay hidden, to let the verdict speak for itself. But every time I opened the box of letters from other soldiers, I saw the same message written in different words. "Because you spoke, I finally did too." Maybe that was reason enough. So I agreed. The press conference was held in Raleigh at a neutral venue chosen to avoid triggering headlines like Army Scandal. The day before, Maya and Captain Rachel Kim helped me prepare. "Keep it simple," Rachel said. "Tell your truth. Don't perform it." I wore my dress uniform not because I felt like a soldier again, but because I wanted people to see that the uniform didn't belong to the ones who misused it. It belonged to those who honored it. When I stepped up to the podium, flashes from cameras burst like small explosions. My hands trembled slightly, but my voice didn't. When I joined the Army, I believed discipline meant strength and silence meant loyalty. I was wrong. Real loyalty is protecting what's right, not hiding what's wrong. The room was silent. I told them about Fort Liberty, about how an act disguised as training nearly destroyed my career and my faith in the system meant to protect me. "The uniform doesn't erase accountability," I said. "It demands it." A reporter asked the question I had dreaded most. "Do you forgive your stepfather?" I paused, the weight of the word pressing on my chest. "Forgiveness isn't freedom," I said finally. "Truth is." Another reporter followed up. "What would you say to soldiers who are afraid to report abuse?" I looked into the rows of cameras. I'd say, speak anyway. Fear only lasts a moment. Silence can last a lifetime. When the conference ended, Maya caught my arm before I could leave. "You realize what you just did?" she asked. "You turned a story of pain into policy." I laughed softly. "Policy? You'll see," she said with a knowing smile. Within weeks, the Army announced revisions to instructor conduct regulations. The new directive required that all physical demonstrations during training be recorded and independently reviewed. Medical personnel were given expanded authority to bypass rank and escalate injury reports directly to CID. It wasn't just words on paper, it was change born from consequence. When Maya forwarded me the memo, I cried for the first time in months, not from pain, but from relief. One evening, Rachel called from the JAG office. "You made waves, Ellis," she said. "Fort Leavenworth won't be seeing another case like this without immediate oversight." I could hear the pride in her voice, the kind that didn't come from victory, but from vindication. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "Better," I said honestly. "Lighter," she chuckled. "You earned it." Lisa reached out again this time, not through letters, but a phone call. I hesitated before answering, unsure of what I still owed her. Her voice trembled. "I saw the press conference," she said. "You were brave." I didn't know what to say. She continued, "I've been going to counseling. They say facing the truth is part of healing." I closed my eyes, leaning against the window. "It is," I said quietly. "But healing doesn't mean going back. It means moving forward." There was a long pause before she whispered, "I understand." And for the first time, I believed her. By winter, invitations started arriving: veteran advocacy groups, women's leadership panels, survivor networks. I turned down most, but one caught my attention: Integrity in Service Award Ceremony, Fort Liberty. Maya's name was listed as the nominator. "You're kidding," I said when she told me. "You know I don't do ceremonies." She grinned. "You'll do this one." The ceremony was held in a modest hall on base, not the grand parade ground. Still, it felt momentous. The audience wasn't just officers. It was medics, clerks, young privates, the ones who kept the Army running quietly. Maya introduced me, her words simple. Courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the steady act of standing when silence is easier. When she handed me the award, I didn't think about Patrick or the courtroom or the pain. I thought about every person who'd written to me, every soldier still trying to find their voice. Afterward, reporters asked for another statement, but I declined. The story didn't need new words, it needed to live in the actions that followed. Outside the hall, the air was crisp. the sky an endless Carolina blue. Maya walked beside me, her uniform jacket unbuttoned, her usual composure replaced by quiet pride. You realize, she said, there's probably someone watching this today who'll remember it years from now when it's their turn to speak up. I smiled. Then it's worth every scar. Later that evening, I watched the news segment replayed on TV. The anchor's voice was calm but reverent. Specialist Cameron Ellis, whose case prompted military-wide reform, says her fight was never about revenge, but about restoring trust. The camera cut to me on stage smiling faintly, the metal gleaming against my uniform. The headline read, "Truth Outranks Power." Lisa watched it too, I later learned. She sent one last letter after that. "You don't owe me forgiveness, but I hope you'll always know how proud your father would be." I didn't cry when I read it. I simply placed it in the box with the others, the ones that told stories of survival courage and small victories. That night, sitting by the window of my apartment, I watched the lights of Fort Liberty flicker in the distance. The same base that had once been my cage was now the proof that truth could shake even the strongest walls. I whispered into the quiet, not as a soldier, not as a victim, but as someone who had reclaimed her voice. "Justice," I said softly, "isn't loud, it's steady." A year later, the air at Fort Liberty felt different. The morning sun spilled gold over the parade ground, catching the edges of the flags as they moved in the breeze. I stood in uniform again, the same fabric that once represented pain now resting lightly on my shoulders. The scars along my ribs had faded into faint silver lines, reminders not of what broke me, but of what rebuilt me. The ceremony was small, no cameras this time, no headlines. Just quiet faces, familiar ones, the kind who understood what it meant to keep standing when life tried to make you kneel. Captain Rachel Kim was there smiling softly from the second row. Lieutenant Maya Clark stood beside her crisp uniform, gleaming that same calm strength in her eyes. When the colonel called my name, I stepped forward to receive the Army Commendation Medal for courage in reporting misconduct. Maya was the one chosen to pin at her hands steady as she fastened the medal to my chest. For every voice that stayed silent, she whispered, so only I could hear you spoke. I met her gaze and nodded. For every truth that stayed buried, I said quietly, we dug it up. After the applause faded, I walked outside into the open field. The wind carried faint echoes from training drills in the distance, boots hitting dirt commands, shouted life going on. I took a deep breath, not of duty, but of freedom. The base no longer felt like the place where I'd been broken. It felt like the ground where I'd learned to rise. Maya joined me a moment later, hands in her pockets. "You ever think about leaving the service?" she asked. I smiled faintly. "Every day." But then I remember change doesn't happen from the outside. Someone has to stay. She nodded understanding without needing more words. "You're not the same soldier you were," she said. "No," I agreed, looking toward the horizon. "I'm better." Later that night, I sat at my desk in my quiet apartment, the medal resting beside my journal. The box of letters still sat on the shelf fuller now, notes from people who'd found courage in the story that once nearly destroyed me. I opened my journal to the last page and wrote, "Rebirth isn't about forgetting the fire. It's about learning that you can walk through it and still come out whole." Before turning off the light, I looked out the window one last time. The stars above Fort Liberty burned steady, not brilliant, but constant. Somewhere out there, a young soldier was learning that silence was not strength, that obedience was not loyalty, that truth, no matter how painful, was the only thing that could set them free. Patrick thought he broke me, but what he really did was build the part of me that will never bend again.